Hey guys, it's Chuck the Gate, and this week we have seen a lot of layoffs in the gaming industry, and Microsoft has taken the cake with their brutal layoffs as far as their gaming division, formerly known as Xbox. And it's like, a shadow of its former self, let's be honest. So this woman has come in and she has completely decimated studios and even technologies in which I'm about to go into right now. The big ups, the board of directors, the shareholders, they kind of scuff off their shoulders and don't take the blame because now they have a go-to person, a go-to man as in Asha Sharma. So all the arrows are pointed at her. But one of the most brutal layoffs that we have witnessed this week, and nobody's really paying attention because it's actually a lot bigger than you think, and not so much for the games, even though the games are legendary, but the technology that goes into id Software. And if you pay very close attention, one of the biggest first-person shooters and the biggest franchises in all of gaming, Call of Duty, started off on the id Software engine, on the id Tech engine. This is back in the day, and it evolves in what we know today as the Call of Duty engine. Call of Duty is technically birthed and it was born on the id Tech engine. So this week, id Software Dev claims it's been relegated to support studio size as 136 layoffs are confirmed. A former id artist says that they're still in shock at how brutal the layoff cuts were. So yesterday, a war notice filed in Texas indicated that 96 workers have been laid off in Richardson, Texas, where id is based, and a further 40 remote roles have been cut for a total of 136 job losses. According to an announcement published by the Communication Workers of America last December, id had 185 employees in total, which would mean that if the figure is accurate, the majority of the studio's workers have been laid off in this week's huge Xbox cuts. So Derek Best, a former VFX artist who worked at id for all three of the modern Doom games, which is Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and Doom The Dark Ages, published a lengthy post on LinkedIn. Says that he was in shock at how brutal the layoffs cuts were, and he goes on to say collectively decades of knowledge was wiped out in the studio. He claimed the VFX team was eliminated down to one single artist with no lead or producer. The engine programmer responsible for the massive gains in VFX pipeline improvements, like all the particle editors that work, was let go as well. He goes on to say that all of the devs had Houdini level knowledge for procedural modeling or cached animations were wiped out, so the work for Doom The Dark Ages in that program has gone to waste with no one to carry it on. And that's why I said this is pretty brutal, because if you notice when you compare the id Tech to Unreal, Unreal may look a lot prettier, it may have a lot more technology because they do have the dollars, right? Epic does have that dollar power because they license out their engine to the rest of the world and they get a cut from that. And so the money printing machine over at Epic is enormous, along with Fortnite and several other services that they're trying to run. But when you compare the performance, right, to the id Tech engine, id Tech is one of the top and the best performing engines in the world. It's mind-boggling to me that Microsoft didn't really see this through. They could have at least got the core people at id Tech, the people responsible for the technology and everything else that goes along with id Tech engine, and then they bring it on and then they just fire everybody else. I can see that. But no, they're actually decimating the entire technology. And when the last person goes, guys, that's it. The article continues, id Software is one of the most historic developers in the games industry, known for its cutting-edge technology used to power shooters like Doom and Quake. However, Best speculated that the cuts could lead to the developer no longer building its own games or using its own engine technology. Quote, writing on the wall is getting relegated to support side studio and moving to Unreal, he wrote. Based on internal emails and the roles, you can clearly see who got impacted. Engine team was decimated, supremely short-sighted and brain-dead moves from Asha and her team. Here's the worst part of this interview. In another LinkedIn post, id Effects artist Todd Boyce criticized the timing of the layoffs, which took place the day before the release of a major expansion for Doom The Dark Ages, which he claimed developers worked crunch time overtime to complete. Quote, "This is what insanity and despicable corporate greed looks like. What a complete disregard for people who spent months working on unpaid overtime to make the DLC and for an engine that has consistently been the industry standard for performance. It's pretty insulting how it was done, when it was done, and what it will do to the ID brand and those who are still employed for now." Guys, as you already know, id Software was co-founded by the great John Carmack and John Romero, two OG scientists and nerds and gaming nerds from like the 80s. And this is what I'm talking about when like the industry today is just infected with activists, programmers, and developers, and a lot of them don't even play games, and many have gone on record stating that they even don't like playing games and they don't like the games that they're working on. They're just filling up their resumes in hopes to work in Hollywood. And the era of developers and nerds and real geeks playing games and making games, the games that we grew up with like Doom and Quake and Wolfenstein, those days are over, guys. And it really saddens me that we have come to this era in gaming and we're seeing it now. In the last video, I talked about how, you know, the crash isn't so obvious in your face, but it's death by 1,000 cuts, and it's little by little that we're seeing this industry change before our very eyes.